guys, welcome to the We Make Art Paint by Numbers Pet Portrait tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to work on your pet portraits. I've gone through quite a few things. However, if there's any questions that you have, please feel free to contact us on Facebook or you can email us. There's just a few things that I wanted to talk about before you get started. When using the canvas, you want to be sure that when you're painting, you're going to paint the sides of the canvas as well. It makes it a lot easier to hang up and look nice. You can always wrap around the color that you see in the front onto the side here, or you can paint it all flat. Just be sure that you don't get it onto the front of the canvas. Also, when you're touching your canvas or moving it around, try not to press into any parts of the canvas that are vulnerable, and don't ever hook your hands into the canvas itself. This will cause warping in the canvas, and it may be a little bit harder for you to get that bubble down. Also, when you're finished with your painting, you're going to want to seal it, and so you can use a couple different ways. You can use Mod Podge, there's a spray, or you can use regular Mod Podge on it. You can polyurethane it. It does have a little tinge of color to it, so the polyurethane might take any spots that are pure white and turn them just slightly tan. Or you can just buy some hairspray. Cheap hairspray is just fine. You'll spray it down about 3 times, letting it dry between each time, and then you'll have a nice seal on your painting for any moisture or humidity that you might have. Here at We Make Art, everything we want to do is to create happiness, and I know that right now is a really tough time, and so we want to be sure that we're helping you create your happiness with your pet portraits. Please contact us if you have any information, and we would just like to, on behalf of Miss E and I, like to say that thank you for your patronage. It is you that make our jobs possible. Art is our life, and you have given us the opportunity to allow it to become our career. So please enjoy the tutorial, and thank you for your time.
Thanks for joining us for the We Make Art Pet Portrait Paint by Numbers video. There are a few things that are not included in your package: brushes, plates, napkins, and water. When you go to get brushes, it's important that you'll look for 3 different types: a larger brush, preferably square, a medium brush, also square, and a very small brush used for detail. If the brushes are angular, that is quite all right. When using these brushes, it's important to note that where the brush and the metal meet is where the paint and water will sit when washing. So you would definitely want to use a little bit of pressure on the brush, using all the bristles in the same direction to help get out the color and the water for your next paint. When holding the brush to paint a larger area like the background, you can use a loose grip on the paintbrush. When you are using it for detail work, it's best to hold it like a pen or a pencil because of the muscle memory in your hands. The paint that we're using is acrylic latex, also known as craft paint. It is water soluble, which means it can get thinner in water, or you can re-wet it to create the texture it is now. This paint is always best when used with 2 coats, especially if the paint is a darker color. When mixing the colors or blending them, it's always best if both of the colors are still wet. Paints are made of 2 things, pigment and gesso. Gesso is also what they use on the canvas to create that white, smooth texture. A canvas originally has a tan tone to it. This will be placed on the canvas and help to create binding between the pigment in the paint and the canvas itself. Using a little moisture can help keep things very smooth on the canvas, and the drier the brush and the less moisture, the more thick the paint can be. You can use a plate to mix your colors and store them in large plastic bags to help keep them for a later time. When beginning to paint, 2 things about loading the brush are important. It's always important to know how much paint you have on the brush and how you're using the brush in what direction. The amount of pressure placed on the brush can make a very big difference in what your brush stroke will look like. A very light pressure will allow a thin line, where a very hard pressure will cause that same brush to have a thick line. You can use the brush horizontally when outlining and widthwise when making larger brush strokes. By adding a second brush stroke after the paint has dried, you can create a darker color. It's important to allow the first coat to dry before adding the second. If the coat is half dry when adding the second, the color will pull up as if you're putting a second coat of nail polish on without the first one drying. That will cause a gap in the first coat, which might be a pain in the butt a little bit later. Now I'll be starting my background. I'll be making sure that I go all the way to the line. Some of you with fuzzier pets might have lines that don't look exactly like your pet, and that's okay. You'll still want to go all the way to the line. This allows you to place fur on top of the background rather than try to place background back in once you've had your fur. Some people might have what we call a floating pet, which means that you can see the feet and the pet is placed somewhere in the middle. For this, you can always do a graduation of color, which means going from one color to another, often called ombre, using a darker color closer to where the hips of the pet are, making it look as if there is a horizon line or some type of ground. That'll kind of stop your pet from looking like it's floating completely on the page. The pet portrait might have to do a second coat for the background, but you can still work within the portrait itself to be sure that you're making your time be very efficient. I'm going to add a little black just to show you how it overlaps on top to help create that hair. Starting with your darker colors, you'll want to start with the very darkest color first. We're going to be putting them in the very structured places that we have our numbers. These are a lot of what we call the base painting. Most paintings require one coat of basing before you allow texture on top of it. So I'm just going to add in all of my darker spots, starting with my black. Now that I've added this in, I'm going to go into painting the tongue. I've used the same color as before to create the color of the tongue. Most times, you'll want any kind of color within your pet to be muted slightly. So you'll absolutely add just a teeny tiny touch of black to it or brown to help mute that color. I am not adding teeth in until the very end. And I want to make sure that my brush strokes are all very similar, making it much easier to hide them after we're done. Remember that it's always okay to make a mistake. Once the paint is dry, you can always paint over it, even if it's black. Next, I'm going to go with my base color so I can allow my pink to dry. Always double check your pet. Be sure that you're painting what you're seeing. Now I'm going to come in with a little bit of this goldish tan and begin to paint the places around the nose and the nostril. Now I'm going to mix up my darker pink for the tongue. When using black to darken something, always be sure that you just do a little bit. You can always add more if it's not dark enough. If it becomes too dark, however, you can put more of the lighter color into it. Always be sure to double check the colors with the picture that you have of the pet, just to be sure that you're getting the right mixture. Now when I bring the darker color in for the mouth, I'm going to follow along the lines that I have there and brush in. It's always a little darker inside the mouth, and so we want to make sure that we represent that. Because I want a distinction in the crease of the tongue, after it's drying just a bit, I'm going to add a little bit more black onto there and then use the colors backwards to start to blend those colors in. Again, I'm working with these colors while they're still wet, and I'm using a very light touch on my brush. Most dogs have a little bit of a dark patch underneath the nose that is the color of the cheeks, but just a little bit darker. Some of them are completely black. What we're going to do here is we're going to bring it in, but we would like to try to find a way to fade it. So I'm going to bring this in, and to avoid giving him just a straight up stash, I'm going to place the color in, and then I'm going to pat it lightly at the ends to help it blend into the pet's face. Having hard lines can help a lot with there being confusion. Even if something blends, having a hard line is okay. I bring the lines all the way through the mouth, and because I'm using a color that I want to use somewhere else in the painting to help restore a little bit of balance, I'm going to bring it down into this corner right here. It's always best to add a color twice in a picture. Some of your paint by numbers might have instructions that say 1 + 1 + 2. This is normally within the gray areas because you're mixing your own gray. It's important to note that most of the time you'll need twice as much white as you would black. 1 + 1 + 2 means a lighter gray. 1 + 2 means a darker gray. Be sure that you make more than you need of your mixture colors. That way, if you need to touch up in the end or use them for something else, you can be sure to have that exact color because it's very hard to paint when you're trying to make a same color again and you can't quite get the right color. If you start with a darker gray, you can always add more white to it afterwards to get to your lighter gray. When you have a light dog and you're trying to create shadowing within a light dog versus a black dog, you're going to be using opposites. You'll probably use a light gray underneath a white fur as opposed to trying to place white fur or gray underneath that. When having a black dog, you'll be placing a lot of color on top of the black to create shapes and shadows. You'll want to see where the things are highlighted the most to help add a little bit of light into those areas. Some of these lines may not be put on your instructional, but you'll see them as you're going, such as light that hits the tops of ears and sides of ears, and the light that'll hit the top of the nose and the snout. Most pets take a little bit more of an outline of certain things. You'll always outline the nose and the nostrils a little tiny bit, especially the little line that goes in between the mustache. You'll also do a natural eyeliner on dogs. For light dogs, this natural eyeliner is usually dark, but for black dogs, this natural eyeliner is a little bit more light. I'm now going to place in the teeth using my square brush and just patting it in, not being too specific except to just keep the teeth very square. If your teeth are drawn in and you have not painted them yet, note that it's always best not to put the line all the way between the teeth. Now we also want to add a little bit of light to the eye. This gives it a little bit of pop, takes your doggy from being a demon to a doggy, and gives them a little bit of life in their eyes. You can also add a little touch of white to the tip of the nose and possibly the tops of the ears or the head if necessary. For those of you with pets that have a lot of fur, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I've got all my base on there, now I need some texture. I'm using a brush that has a little bit harder bristles so that the bristles are very, very far apart from each other. I'm using a very light touch, and I've made sure to create a little bit of moisture in my paint by adding some water to the paint itself to thin it out just a little bit. The thinner the water, the lighter the color you're going to see on there. Although the color is going to be the same, it's just going to be more opaque. This can be used for pets who have spots underneath white hair. You'll place the spots on there and then lightly brush thin white paint on top. When your pet has a lot of hair and a lot of movement in the hair, it's important to be sure that you're going the same way that you see the hair grow. And secondly, you might have to come back in with some of the other colors to just touch up on top and create layers of color within that. If your dog has really curly hair, especially if it's long, it's always best to make little C shapes or crescents rather than S-ing your brush to create that sort of curl to it. You want to be sure most of all to be checking your painting to your picture to make sure that you are creating the same kind of texture and shapes that you see on your pet. Try to be objective and not look at it piece by piece, but rather as a whole.